Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, almost, not quite. It's nice to be back. After a year or so of no proper investment conferences and things like that, it's good to see some familiar faces. And the rest of you, welcome. And you're joining an investment at a rather interesting time, to say the least. Now, we're in one of those worlds where you really couldn't make it up, could you? Here we are trying to clear out CO2 out of the atmosphere, and then we're worried about the fact we're not producing any CO2 so we can have our beer. I mean, it is wonderfully illogical, the whole thing. This is not going to be death by PowerPoint, which I normally try and do for people. So it's absolutely no slides at all. You're just going to have to listen to me for a few minutes, or if I were you, just gently doze off. You may find that more comfortable. Now, despite what everyone would love to tell you at the moment, actually the global economy has not ground to a halt. The global economy is actually progressing and is recovering after what has been the most astonishing period of time where effectively you had a series of global heart attacks in the very different economies. And it's interesting to see how different countries have managed their way through it, some well, some mistakenly, and some in a very controlled manner. And actually, overall, I was actually quite impressed by a lot of the central banks and finance ministers as to how quickly they reacted. And of course, with the joy of hindsight, you'll see the bits they've got wrong, but that's inevitable. That's for the politicians to bicker over. What I'm actually interested in is to see actually what happens then the next stage of the global economy so we can position our portfolios to really take account of it. Now, the good news is, as you can see from the show today, okay, this is an early stage recovery, but you've never had so much choice and opportunity for investments. You only go back a few years, and you are incredibly constricted. It was stocks, that was it, and you had to go through a broker. You don't have to go too far back, pre-Big Bang, when commissions were fixed, and some would say some of the prices. The range of different alternatives was quite limited, and other things were just closed to you. You don't have to go too far back when we don't even do proper foreign exchange trading or anything like that, let alone even haven't been able to take actually any amount of money out of the country. So here are the opportunities to actually learn about all the various different techniques and different areas to deal with. But basically, remember, keep it very, very simple. If you don't understand what's going on, that's not your problem, that's their problem. They can't explain it to you. So be wary, because there are still scoundrels and scams around, sometimes in the most public of places, and please be very wary indeed. One particular area which you can see some opportunities of the development we've had recently of SPACs or SPAVs, special vehicles for investment, often run by SPIVs as far as I can work out, where you actually see, and quite literally in terms of one of the memoranda put out, to be able to invest in opportunities that we perceive to be sensible. We're going to invest in someone who says we're going to invest in something we perceive to be sensible, when you have no idea what it is. As I say, you couldn't make it up. So let's have a quick whiz around the world as to actually what's going on and give you some idea. So first of all, let's start with the United States. The United States economy actually is in not bad position. Remember, the primary driver of the US economy is Mr. and Mrs. Joe Schmo living in Little Rock, Arkansas, shopping in Walmart. And if they're upset, it's amazing how quickly the rest of the world gets to know about it. And why would they be upset? Well, if you go back to the financial crisis, they were upset because the value of their house dropped dramatically. In New England, that was by about 40%. If you go back to Arkansas, you'll find that some prices dropped by over 60 or 70%. It was really quite astonishing. And of course, what happens then? People lose confidence, their primary asset is now stuck or devalued, and therefore they stop spending, they stop investing, and the world very nearly ground to a halt as a result of that. But there was action taken, and the Americans are far more effective at dealing with their banking crisis than we were, and the economy got moving again really quite quickly. So after what's happened in the past 18 months, the American economy has picked up. You're seeing more consumer expenditure going on. Inevitably, you've got the V-shaped recovery. You have to be careful which way around you do the Vs as to whether they're taking the mickey or not. But actually, you did see a pickup. Inevitably, though, what you're then going to see is then a slowdown after that, because obviously it wasn't going to continue at levels of 5, 6, 7%. So you're going to see something now which is going to be much more wobbly. However, actually, in terms of the demand is still there. Do not underestimate the support bill being put through by the Biden administration, watered down hugely from $3 trillion. Why don't we just throw $1 trillion around? You can't even get the trillion noughts on your average calculator. yet somehow we just managed to it's just another trillion. So now we're down to about 1.7 trillion overall, cut back. That's still, nonetheless, in real terms, considerably larger than Roosevelt's New Deal back in the 30s. So do not underestimate the power of that coming in. So the American economy also going through a huge change in terms of of the technology and the application thereof. And obviously you've seen that reflected in technology stocks. But more to the point, actually, just in terms of actually the reinvestment in America, a lot of that is still going on as companies are desperately trying to change, to improve not just their productivity through better technology, but through those initials they're all getting thoroughly fed up with of ESG, to try and make themselves look more socially acceptable. I suppose I should mention ESG. Be wary of greenwash. There's an awful lot of, what's the technical term? Lying going on when it comes to some of the people claiming to find themselves carbon neutral. After all, we no longer have oil companies, do we? We now have energy management companies who will give you a date sometime in the future, which I hope you'll forget, by which time they claim to be carbon neutral. So be really rather wary. So the US then finds itself in a position where domestically, remember, the US does not actually need the rest of the world in terms of running its economy. It needs supply and facilities and things like that, but it can operate in a very insular manner. Having said that, America is dependent on the rest of the world for one key area, and that is, of course, its financing. Who is the world's largest purchaser and owner of American debt? Well, most of the time it's China. Sometimes actually it's Japan. But actually you'll find yourself in a position where the Americans and the Chinese are in a symbiotic relationship with one another. They will argue and bicker with one another inevitably, but they can't actually do without each other. The question is, we'll come back to the question of China a bit later, about whether that relationship can continue given the political arguments that are going on at the moment, particularly with regard to not just some of the contractual and economic ties between the countries, but also some of the politics in terms of the likes of Taiwan and other areas of significant border dispute. It'll be interesting to see just how strong the Biden administration is going to be about all of this. He does seem to be changing his position really quite remarkable speed. So, in America overall, I'm actually quite positive that what we're going to be seeing is further growth there, providing this bill does go through, which is actually, I think, very quite likely now, and giving that underlying support. Markets have already moved significantly, as we all know, but moved actually in a relatively narrow range overall, because what you've been seeing is primarily, obviously, the tech stocks. You didn't have to be a wildly clever investor over the past few years just to go and buy an ETF, an American, or just, frankly, buy the ETF and just buy the NASDAQ. You would have done extremely well out of doing that. Further investment knowledge wasn't really applicable. That's not going to continue. So now is the time, actually, you can find broadening out for those areas which are still going to be vital and still going to be used. And I think still look at those ones which have been left behind. And I know they've already been talked about, as we've seen, most recently you've seen how the airlines have come back, the banks have come back, as you're seeing more of the other areas of the economy starting to move through. And I think that's actually going to be really very exciting indeed and provide those opportunities. Be wary. We're going to be headed, this is autumn, as we all know, the meteorological stormy weather. We're also going to find financial stormy weather as well. There are going to be some more really quite significant bouts of volatility. And as ever, the question will be, are you going to use those as opportunities to go in, or is it the start of something more unpleasant? Well, I've always found over my years that I tend to actually, every time I think things are going to get more unpleasant, and I then come out of the market and stay out of the market, I end up losing out. There's nothing wrong with being a longer-term investor, as long as you think the rest of the world is actually going to continue and actually getting the benefit of long-term growth, but compounding of your returns. Compounding of returns may sound astonishingly dull, but that's actually where most of your growth is actually going to be coming from, which is why we need to all be investing from a much earlier age. And I, for one, would suggest the best age to try and start investing is 0. Not necessarily your decision-making may be very good, but maybe your parents could try and help. So, America now finds itself in that position where it is starting to come back. You've seen now, obviously, with the price of energy going up dramatically, but of course that benefits. We've got the frackers coming back online again, so you'll see more benefit coming through on that one. The concern I probably have primarily in America is actually still going to be down to some of the regulation and tightening that we're going to be seeing coming through, particularly in some of the trading scandals, some of which haven't broken to the surface yet.